My ship was definitely not supposed to be in 17 different pieces scattered across what looked like a crystalline wasteland, but here we were anyway. The good news was that the emergency beacon was still functional. The bad news was that it was broadcasting a cheerful message about my imminent rescue to a completely empty star system, which seemed overly optimistic given that the nearest inhabited world was approximately 47 light-years away. Well, Zara, I said to myself, because talking to yourself is only concerning when you start disagreeing with your own opinions, at least the terraforming readings were accurate. Breathable atmosphere, reasonable gravity, and only a moderate chance of being eaten by indigenous wildlife. I was Dr. Zara Nightingale, molecular engineer, amateur philosopher, and apparently the galaxy's newest castaway. My research vessel had been conducting a routine survey of Xerion Prime, cataloging its potential for terraforming development, when something had gone spectacularly wrong with the navigation systems. The crash landing had been survivable, which put it in the top 10% of my career experiences. The planet itself was beautiful in an alien way, with purple-tinged grass that chimed softly in the wind and trees that looked like someone had crossbred oaks with disco balls. The crystalline formations I'd initially mistaken for rocks were actually some kind of natural data storage system, humming with electromagnetic activity that my instruments couldn't quite decipher. I was in the middle of assembling a makeshift shelter from salvaged hull plates when I heard someone crying. The sound was coming from behind a cluster of the singing trees, and it definitely wasn't being made by any indigenous wildlife I'd read about in the survey reports. It sounded distinctly humanoid, and specifically like a very upset child. "Hello?" I called, grabbing my medical kit and a portable scanner. "Is someone there?" A small figure emerged from behind the trees, and I had to do a double take. It was a little girl, maybe 7 years old, with dark hair and the most beautiful pointed ears I'd ever seen. She was wearing what looked like formal court dress made from some kind of shimmering fabric, and she was absolutely filthy. "Oh, sweetheart," I said, kneeling down to her eye level, "what are you doing way out here?" She looked at me with enormous violet eyes and said something in a language that sounded like musical mathematics. My universal translator, one of the few pieces of equipment that had survived the crash intact, struggled for a moment before offering, "Lost. Very lost. Are you a forest spirit?" "I'm definitely not a forest spirit," I said gently. "I'm Dr. Zara Nightingale, and I'm lost too." "What's your name?" "Lyralii," she said, and even through the translator, her voice had a musical quality. "I was with the hunting party, but there were so many people and so much noise, and I wanted to see the singing trees, and then I couldn't find anyone. I looked around at the vast expanse of alien wilderness." "How long have you been lost, Lyralii?" She held up 3 fingers, then added a 4th, then looked confused and settled on showing me both hands. "Many time periods. I'm very hungry, and it got dark twice. 2 days. A 7-year-old had been wandering around an alien wilderness for 2 days. My parental instincts, which I hadn't realized I possessed, immediately kicked into overdrive. "Well, that's easily fixed," I said, pulling a nutrient bar from my emergency supplies. "These taste like cardboard, but they're perfectly safe for most humanoid species. And I just happened to be setting up a shelter when you arrived." Lyralii bit into the nutrient bar and made a face that transcended species barriers in its expression of culinary disappointment. "It tastes like sad," she announced. "That's the most accurate description of military rations I've ever heard," I laughed. "Unfortunately, sad is all I have until rescue arrives." "Rescue? Someone will come looking for me eventually. And I'm sure someone's looking for you too. A hunting party doesn't just lose a little girl and give up." Lyralii's expression became complicated in the way that only children can manage. "Maybe they think I fell in the crystal caves. Maybe they stopped looking. Trust me, if you're important enough to be dressed like that," I said, gesturing at her elaborate outfit, "people are definitely still looking for you." The shelter I'd been constructing was basically a lean-to made from hull plates and held together with emergency sealant, but it was waterproof and would keep the wind off. As we worked together to gather soft grass for bedding, I noticed that Lyralii seemed remarkably calm for a lost child. "Aren't you scared?" I asked. "Should I be scared of you?" "Well, no, but I'm a complete stranger from a different species." Lyralii considered this seriously. "You gave me food and you're building us a house. In the stories, bad people don't usually do those things. That's surprisingly logical. Mother says I'm too logical for my own good." As the afternoon wore on, I learned that Lyralii was fascinated by my equipment, particularly my sonic screwdriver and the portable molecular analyzer. She watched with rapt attention as I used the analyzer to test local water sources, and cheered when the sonic screwdriver managed to coax some additional power from my dying communicator. "It's like magic," she breathed. "It's not magic, it's science," I explained. "Magic is when things happen for no reason. Science is when things happen for very specific reasons that we can measure and predict. Can you teach me science?" "I can teach you some basic principles," I said, showing her how the molecular analyzer worked. "See, everything is made up of tiny particles called atoms. The analyzer identifies what something is made of by looking at its atomic structure." Lyralii absorbed this information with the intensity of a dedicated student. "So you could tell what I'm made of?" "I could, but that would be rude without permission. Plus, I already know you're made of the same basic materials as humans, just arranged a little differently. That's why we can understand each other." "Are there many humans?" "Billions of us, spread across hundreds of worlds." Her eyes went wide. "Hundreds of worlds? How do you visit them all?" "Ships like the one that crashed. Though hopefully with better navigation systems." As evening approached, dark clouds began gathering on the horizon, and the wind picked up significantly. Lyralii pressed closer to me in our little shelter as the first drops of rain began to fall. "It's going to be a big storm," she said quietly. She was right. Within an hour, we were experiencing what could only be described as a meteorological temper tantrum, with rain that fell sideways and wind that made the crystalline formations sing in harmony like a cosmic choir having a breakdown. "Well," I said, checking the integrity of our shelter as it groaned under the wind, "this is certainly atmospheric." Lyralii giggled. "You make jokes when you're scared too." Mother does that. When the court gets too serious, she makes jokes that make everyone confused. Your mother sounds wise." "She's the queen," Lyralii said simply, as if mentioning that her mother occasionally bought groceries. I tried very hard not to choke on my water. "The queen? As in, the ruler of this planet?" "Queen Valdara of the Xerian Empire," Lyralii recited in the tone of someone who'd had royal protocol drilled into her since birth. "Defender of the crystal realm, keeper of the ancient ways, and mother of the future." "So you're a princess?" "Princess Lyralii," she confirmed. "Though I'm not supposed to tell strangers that until after the formal introductions and the ceremonial gift exchange." I stared at her. "Lyralii, do you have any idea how much trouble I'm going to be in when they find us?" "Why would you be in trouble?" "You saved me." "Because I'm an alien who crashed on your planet and spent 2 days alone with the royal heir. That's going to look suspicious to a lot of people." Lyralii frowned. "That's stupid. You're nice." "Thank you, but nice doesn't always matter in politics." The storm raged through the night, and I found myself telling Lyralii stories about Earth, about the cities that floated in the clouds of Venus, about the ice dancers of Europa and the crystal gardens of Titan. She listened with the rapt attention of a child discovering that the universe was far larger and more wonderful than she'd ever imagined. "When I grow up," she said sleepily, "I want to see all those places." "Maybe you will," I said, though privately I wondered if the isolationist Xerian Empire would ever allow their princess to leave the planet. "Will you show them to me?" "If I can, sweetheart. If I can." As Lyralii fell asleep curled against my side, I stared out at the storm and wondered what exactly I'd gotten myself into. Somewhere out there, the most powerful ruler in the Xerian Empire was probably mobilizing every resource at her disposal to find her missing daughter. And when they found her, they were going to find me too. I had a feeling that my quiet career in terraforming research was about to become significantly more complicated. The search party found us at dawn, which was both a relief and absolutely terrifying. I woke to the sound of what I could only describe as mechanical pterodactyls circling overhead, their riders calling out in the same musical language Lyralii spoke. She was already awake, bouncing with excitement. They came. They came, she shouted, waving at the flying creatures with the enthusiasm of someone who hadn't spent the night wondering if she'd ever see her family again. Princess Lyralii, came a voice from above, and one of the riders directed their mount to land near our shelter. The creature was beautiful and terrifying in equal measure, like a cross between a dragon and a hummingbird, with iridescent feathers that shifted color in the morning light. The rider dismounted with practiced grace, revealing himself to be a tall, elegant being with the same pointed ears as Lyralii, though his were decorated with intricate silver jewelry. His uniform was clearly military, and his expression when he saw me was the universal look of someone whose day had just become much more complicated. "Princess," he said in accented but clear standard, "we have been searching for you." "The Queen has been concerned. Commander Theros." Lyralii ran to him and was immediately swept up in what was obviously a relief hug. "This is Dr. Zara Nightingale. She saved me from the storm and taught me about atoms." Commander Theros looked at me over Lyralii's head with an expression that suggested teaching the princess about atomic structure might not have been the wisest choice. "Dr. Nightingale," he said formally, "by what authority do you trespass on Xerian soil?" "By the authority of gravitational forces and catastrophic navigation failure," I replied, gesturing at the scattered remains of my ship. "I'm not exactly here by choice." "She crashed," Lyralii added helpfully. "Her ship exploded into many pieces. But she made us a house and shared her sad food." "Sad food?" Theros asked. "Military rations," I explained. "Apparently they taste like sadness." Despite the tension of the situation, I caught the ghost of a smile on the commander's face. "An accurate assessment. Princess, we must return you to the palace immediately. Your mother has mobilized half the royal fleet." "Is she angry?" "She is, concerned," Theros repeated diplomatically. The flight to the palace was an experience I won't soon forget. The mechanical pterodactyls, which I learned were called skywardens, were actually biomechanical hybrids that could carry multiple passengers in comfortable saddle configurations. Lyralii insisted on riding with me, chattering excitedly about the landscape below while I tried not to think about how high we were flying without any safety equipment I recognized. The palace itself was a marvel of crystalline architecture that seemed to grow directly from the mountainside. Spires twisted skyward like frozen music, and bridges of what looked like solid light connected different sections of the complex. It was beautiful, imposing, and exactly the sort of place where foreign visitors probably got executed for diplomatic infractions. "Dr. Nightingale," Commander Theros said as we landed in a courtyard filled with beings in elaborate court dress, "I must inform you that no outsider has set foot in the palace for over 3 centuries. Your presence here is unprecedented. Unprecedented in a good way or unprecedented in a prepare the execution chamber way? That remains to be determined." The throne room was enormous, with a vaulted ceiling that seemed to disappear into crystalline infinity. Courtiers in flowing robes lined the walls, their pointed ears decorated with jewelry that chimed softly when they moved. At the far end of the room, on a throne that appeared to be carved from a single massive gemstone, sat Queen Valdara. She was not what I had expected. Despite being Lyralii's mother, she looked no older than 30, with silver hair that moved as if underwater and eyes that held the weight of centuries. Her beauty was the kind that made you forget to breathe, but her expression as she watched us approach suggested that breathing might soon become optional anyway. "Lyralii," the queen said, and her voice carried clearly across the vast space without seeming loud, "approach." The princess ran to her mother and was immediately gathered into an embrace that spoke of genuine love and relief. For a moment, Queen Valdara's regal composure cracked, revealing the worried mother beneath. "I thought I had lost you," she whispered, loud enough for the acoustics of the room to carry to where I stood. "I was safe, mother. Dr. Zara took care of me." The queen's gaze shifted to me, and I felt like a specimen under a microscope. "Dar. Zara Nightingale," she said, and somehow my name sounded both musical and ominous when she pronounced it. "You have been accused of trespassing on sovereign Zirian territory." "Your Majesty," I said, attempting what I hoped was an appropriate bow, "my presence here was entirely accidental. My research vessel experienced a navigation malfunction that resulted in an emergency landing." "Research vessel?" Queen Valdara's tone suggested that she found my explanation about as believable as a singing fish. "And what exactly were you researching, Dr. Nightingale?" "Terraforming potential. I'm a molecular engineer specializing in atmospheric modification and soil composition analysis." A murmur went through the assembled court, and I got the distinct impression that I'd said something significant without realizing it. "Terraforming," the Queen repeated. "The process by which alien species modify worlds to suit their own biological requirements." "Well, yes, but in this case, it was just preliminary surveying to assess natural development potential. I wasn't actually planning to terraform anything." "She taught me about atoms," Lyralii announced proudly. "And she has a magic tool that can tell what things are made of." "It's not magic, sweetheart, it's a molecular analyzer," I corrected automatically, then realized that correcting the princess in front of the entire court might not have been diplomatically sound. Queen Valdara's expression became even more unreadable. "You instructed my daughter in alien scientific principles." She was curious, and we were stuck in a storm. I thought keeping her mind occupied was better than letting her worry. "Dr. Nightingale," said a voice from the crowd of courtiers, and an elderly being with elaborately twisted ears stepped forward, "I am court xenobiologist Veleth. May I inquire as to your species classification?" "Human. Homo sapiens. Standard carbon-based bipedal humanoid." Veleth produced what looked like a crystalline tablet and began making notes. "Fascinating. And your homeworld?" "Earth, though I've lived on 17 different worlds throughout my career." More murmuring from the court. Queen Valdara held up a hand for silence. "Dr. Nightingale," she said, "the Zirian Empire has maintained isolation from all foreign species for over 300 years. Your presence here, regardless of the circumstances, represents a breach of that isolation." "I understand that, Your Majesty, but I didn't exactly plan this. If you have the capability to repair my ship or transport me to a neutral system, I'd be happy to leave and pretend this never happened." "I'm afraid it's not that simple," the Queen said. "The knowledge of our existence, our location, our capabilities, cannot be allowed to spread to the wider galaxy." The way she said it made my blood run cold. "What exactly are you suggesting?" "You will remain here, as a guest of the court, for the remainder of your natural life." "That's not a guest, that's a prisoner with better accommodations." Queen Valdara's eyes flashed. "The alternative, Dr. Nightingale, is execution for espionage." "Espionage? I'm a terraforming engineer who got lost." "So you claim. But how convenient that a specialist in planetary modification should crash land on one of the few inhabitable worlds in this system." "It's convenient because your planet is inhabitable," I said, my scientific training overriding my diplomatic sense. "If it weren't, I'd be dead instead of standing here having this conversation." "Mother," Lyralii said quietly, tugging on the Queen's robes, "she's not bad. She took care of me." "I know, little star," Queen Valdara said gently. "But adults sometimes have to make decisions based on more than kindness." Court xenobiologist Veleth stepped forward again. "Your Majesty, if I may, preliminary scans indicate that Dr. Nightingale's species shows remarkable genetic compatibility with our own." The implications for hybrid offspring could be significant. I felt like I'd just been hit by a hover car. Hybrid offspring. Nobody said anything about offspring. The genetic compatibility raises questions about the long-term security implications of your presence, Queen Valdara said coldly. Particularly given the close bond you appear to have formed with the princess. She was lost and scared. Of course I formed a bond with her. What kind of monster would I have to be to ignore a frightened child? The kind that might use that child to gain access to classified information. I stared at her in disbelief. You think I orchestrated this entire thing? That I crashed my ship, spent 2 days eating terrible rations and sleeping on the ground, all as part of some elaborate spy plot. Stranger things have been attempted. Your Majesty, I said, trying to keep my voice level, I understand your concerns about security. But I'm not a spy, I'm not an advanced scout, and I'm definitely not planning to have hybrid offspring with anyone. I'm a scientist who made a mistake with her navigation computer and ended up in the wrong star system. The Queen studied me for a long moment. Dr. Nightingale, you will be escorted to suitable quarters while we determine how best to proceed. Consider yourself under protective custody pending a full investigation. Protective custody. Right. I looked around at the sea of pointed ears and elaborate jewelry surrounding me. I don't suppose you have any other humans in protective custody I could talk to? You are the first outsider to set foot on Zirian Prime in 3 centuries, Queen Valdara said. You are quite alone. As guards in ceremonial armor stepped forward to escort me away, Lyralii broke free from her mother and ran to me. Will I see you again? She asked, her violet eyes wide with concern. I don't know, sweetheart, I said honestly. But remember what I taught you about atoms, okay? Everything is made of tiny particles that dance together to make bigger things, she recited solemnly. That's right. And sometimes, when particles that seem different get close enough, they can form something entirely new and wonderful. Queen Valdara's expression was unreadable as the guards led me away, but I caught her watching the interaction between her daughter and me with something that might have been curiosity, or concern, or possibly both. As we walked through corridors lined with portraits of stern-faced royalty, I couldn't help but wonder what I'd gotten myself into. Somehow, I had a feeling that my biggest challenge wouldn't be convincing them I wasn't a spy. It would be convincing them that maybe, just maybe, isolation wasn't the only way to keep their people safe. My quarters in the palace were nicer than most 5-star hotels, which made the fact that I couldn't leave them slightly more bearable. The rooms were carved from the same crystalline material as the rest of the palace, with furniture that seemed to grow organically from the floor and walls. The view from my window showed gardens where flowers sang in harmonious choruses and fountains flowed upward in defiance of gravity. At least if I'm going to be imprisoned for life, I muttered to myself, it's in a place with excellent interior design. The door chimed with a melody that sounded like crystal bells, and I turned to find Princess Lyralii peeking around the entrance. Dr. Zara? May I visit? Of course, sweetheart. Though I'm surprised your guards let you come alone. Commander Theros is right outside. He says I can visit you every day if I promise not to learn any more dangerous alien knowledge. What kind of dangerous alien knowledge could I possibly teach you? Lyralii giggled. He's worried you'll teach me about explosives or space navigation. Well, I could teach you about chemical reactions, but I promise to stick to the non-explosive kinds. She settled into one of the chairs that adjusted itself automatically to her size, a technology that I found simultaneously impressive and mildly unsettling. Dr. Zara, why doesn't Mother like outsiders? That's a complicated question, Lyralii. Sometimes rulers have to make difficult decisions to protect their people. But you're not dangerous. Your mother doesn't know that for certain. From her perspective, I'm a complete unknown who appeared on her world and immediately gained her daughter's trust. That would make any parent nervous. Did you have children on your world? The question hit harder than I expected. No, I was always too busy with my work to settle down and start a family. Are you lonely? I looked at this remarkable child who asked the kinds of questions that adults spent years avoiding. Sometimes. But spending time with you has reminded me how much I enjoy having someone to talk to. I'm lonely too sometimes, Lyraeli admitted. Mother is always busy with queen things, and the other children in the palace are all noble children who have to be very proper all the time. What about your father? Doesn't he spend time with you? Lyraeli's expression became complicated. I don't have a father. Everyone has a father, sweetheart. Even if they're not around anymore. Mother says I was a gift from the crystal spirits. She says some children are too special to need fathers. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the palace's temperature control. In my experience, when powerful people started talking about miraculous births and spiritual gifts, there were usually much more mundane explanations hidden underneath. Lyraeli, have you ever seen any pictures of your father? Or heard stories about him? She shook her head quickly, but there was something in her expression that suggested the topic wasn't as simple as her mother claimed. Over the following days, Lyraeli visited regularly, always accompanied by Commander Theros, who gradually warmed up from suspicious guardian to merely cautious chaperone. The princess was endlessly curious about human culture, asking about everything from our music to our food to the way we organized our governments. Do human queens rule alone? She asked during one visit. Sometimes, but usually they have advisors, parliaments, or other rulers to help them make decisions. Making choices that affect millions of people is too big a job for one person. Mother rules alone. She says it's the only way to make sure the decisions are right. That sounds like a very heavy responsibility. Sometimes I hear her talking to herself in her study late at night. She sounds sad. That evening, as I was reviewing the notes I'd been making about Xerian culture and technology, my door chimed again. This time, it was Queen Valdara herself, looking less regal and more tired than I'd seen her before. Your Majesty, I said, standing quickly. This is unexpected. Dr. Nightingale. I hope you are finding your accommodations adequate. They're beautiful, thank you. Though I have to ask, how long do you plan to keep me here? That depends on several factors, not least of which is the investigation into your background. She moved to the window, gazing out at the gardens below. In the softer light, I could see lines of worry around her eyes that hadn't been visible in the throne room. Your Majesty, may I ask you something? You may ask. Why 300 years of isolation? What happened that made you cut off contact with the rest of the galaxy? Queen Valdara was quiet for so long that I thought she wasn't going to answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. Betrayal, Dr. Nightingale. We learned that trust given to outsiders is trust that will inevitably be broken. What kind of betrayal? The kind that costs lives. The kind that makes you realize that the safety of your people is more important than the curiosity of exploration. I thought about Lyraeli's questions, about the mysterious circumstances of her birth, about the way the court reacted whenever the topic of the princess's father came up. Your Majesty, this betrayal, did it have anything to do with Princess Lyraeli? The Queen's expression hardened. That is not a topic for discussion. I'm not trying to pry into your personal life. But I'm a molecular engineer, and I understand genetics. Lyraeli's ears are different from yours, more rounded at the tips. Her eye color is unusual for your species. And court xenobiologist Velith seemed very interested in the genetic compatibility between humans and Xerions. Dr. Nightingale, I suggest you focus your scientific curiosity on topics that will not result in your immediate removal from these comfortable quarters. But I was already putting the pieces together. 8 years ago. That's when she was born, isn't it? And 8 years ago, there was contact with an outsider. Someone who gained your trust, someone who... Enough. The Queen's voice carried the weight of absolute authority. You will not pursue this line of inquiry. Your Majesty, if Lyraeli's father was human, if that's why you're so suspicious of my presence here, then you need to understand that not all humans are the same person. Whatever happened between you and him, it has nothing to do with me. Queen Valdara turned from the window, and for a moment, her carefully controlled facade slipped. I saw pain there, and loneliness, and a kind of fierce protectiveness that only comes from someone who has been deeply hurt. You think you understand, Dr. Nightingale? You think you can analyze my choices like one of your molecular structures? I think you're a mother trying to protect her daughter from being hurt the way you were hurt. But keeping her isolated from the universe won't protect her forever. Sooner or later, she's going to have questions you can't answer. She's 7 years old. She's 7 years old and already asking about her father. What are you going to tell her when she's 17? Or 27? The Queen's composure cracked further. I will tell her what I have always told her. That she is loved, and she is safe, and that is all that matters. With respect, Your Majesty, that's not going to be enough. Not for a child as intelligent and curious as Lyralii. You have known my daughter for 4 days, Dr. Nightingale. I have known her for her entire life. You're right. But sometimes an outside perspective can see things that were too close to notice. Queen Valdara moved toward the door, then paused. Dar. Nightingale, I am not a cruel ruler. I take no pleasure in keeping you here against your will. But I cannot risk the security of my people, and I cannot risk my daughter's safety, for the sake of your freedom. I understand that. But can I ask you to consider something? What? Maybe the biggest risk to Lyralii's safety isn't letting outsiders in. Maybe it's keeping the truth about her heritage locked away where it can fester and grow into something much more dangerous than honesty ever could be. The Queen left without responding, but I caught the look in her eyes as she walked away. It was the look of someone who had been carrying a secret so heavy that it was slowly crushing her, and who was beginning to wonder if the weight might finally be too much to bear. That night, as I lay in my crystalline bed listening to the distant sound of the singing gardens, I wondered what had happened 8 years ago that had driven Queen Valdara to seal her world away from the galaxy. And I wondered what would happen when Princess Lyralii inevitably learned the truth about her father. Somehow, I had a feeling that I was going to find out sooner rather than later. The formal court session to determine my fate was scheduled for exactly 1 week after my arrival, which gave me plenty of time to worry about whether I'd be executed, imprisoned for life, or subjected to some uniquely Xerian form of punishment that hadn't occurred to me yet. Princess Lyralii had been visiting daily, always with new questions about human culture and always carefully avoiding the topic of fathers, which made me increasingly certain that the subject was more complicated than Queen Valdara's crystal spirit story. Dr. Zara, Lyralii said during what I suspected might be our final visit, why do some humans have different colored eyes and hair? Genetic variation, I explained. Our physical traits come from both our parents, mixed together in different combinations. Both parents? That's right. Half from the mother, half from the father. Lyralii was quiet for a moment. What if someone only knew half of where they came from? Then they might spend their whole life wondering about the other half, I said gently. But that doesn't make them any less complete or loved. Would you want to know? If it was you? I think I would. Even if the truth was difficult, I'd rather know than spend my life wondering. Commander Theros cleared his throat. Princess, it's time to prepare for the court session. As they left, Lyralii looked back at me with an expression that seemed far too serious for a 7-year-old. Dr. Zara? I hope you don't have to go away. Me too, sweetheart. The throne room was even more crowded than before, with representatives from various noble houses, court officials, and what appeared to be the entire Royal Advisory Council. I stood in the center of it all, trying to look dignified while internally cataloging all the ways this could go wrong. Queen Valdara, resplendent in robes that seemed to be cut from liquid starlight, addressed the assembly. We gather today to determine the fate of Dr. Zara Nightingale, the outsider whose presence among us has raised questions of security, sovereignty, and the continuation of our isolation protocols. Court xenobiologist Velith stepped forward with his crystalline tablet. Your Majesty, My investigation into Dr. Nightingale's background confirms her stated credentials. She is indeed a molecular engineer specializing in terraforming technology, with no apparent intelligence connections or military background. However, added another court official, her knowledge of our world's location and capabilities represents a significant security risk. Dr. Nightingale, Queen Valdara said, you have heard the concerns raised by this court. What assurance can you give us that allowing you to leave Xerion Prime will not result in invasion, exploitation, or unwanted attention from your species? I took a deep breath. Your Majesty, I can give you my word that I would never reveal the location or capabilities of your world to anyone. But I understand that the word of a stranger has limited value. Indeed it does. However, I can offer something more concrete. A formal treaty between the Xerion Empire and the Terran Federation, establishing protocols for limited cultural and scientific exchange under strict conditions that you would define. The murmur that went through the court suggested this was not what they had expected me to propose. You presume to negotiate on behalf of your entire species? Asked one of the nobles. No, but I can certainly recommend that such negotiations take place. The Terran Federation has protocols for contact with isolationist civilizations. Respectful, limited contact that preserves your autonomy while allowing for beneficial exchange. Queen Valdara's expression was unreadable. And why would we want any form of exchange with outsiders? Because isolation has costs, Your Majesty. Scientific advancement slows without fresh perspectives. Cultural development stagnates without new ideas. And I paused, knowing that my next words would either save me or doom me. And sometimes isolation becomes a prison that keeps out not just enemies, but also the people who matter most. The Queen's eyes flashed dangerously. Explain. Your Majesty, I believe there was previous contact with my species. I believe that contact resulted in betrayal and pain that led to the current isolation protocols. But I also believe that not all humans are the same person, and not all contact has to end in betrayal. The court erupted in whispered conversations. Queen Valdara held up a hand for silence. Dr. Nightingale, you are venturing into territory that could result in your immediate execution. I understand that, Your Majesty. But if I'm going to be executed anyway, I might as well speak the truth. That's when Princess Lyraliai's voice cut through the tension like a crystal blade. Stop. Everyone turned to see the little princess standing in the gallery reserved for the royal family, her violet eyes blazing with determination. Lyraliai, Queen Valdara said sharply, return to your chambers immediately. No, mother. I'm tired of secrets and lies and everyone thinking I'm too young to understand. Princess. Commander Theros stepped forward, but Lyraliai was already moving toward the center of the room. Dr. Zara is right, she announced to the assembled court. There was previous contact with humans. I know because I've seen the recordings. The silence that followed was so complete I could hear my own heartbeat. What recordings? Queen Valdara's voice was barely controlled. The ones in your private study, mother. The ones of the human man with dark hair and kind eyes who taught you about music from his world and laughed at your jokes and held you when you cried. The queen had gone very pale. Lyraliai, you don't understand what you're saying. I understand that he's my father, Lyraliai said with the devastating honesty that only children possess. I understand that his name was Dr. Marcus Webb, and that he came here 8 years ago as part of a scientific expedition, and that you loved him, and that he loved you, and that something happened that made him leave. The court was in chaos. Nobles were shouting, advisors were frantically consulting their tablets, and guards were looking uncertain about whether they should intervene in a family dispute involving the royal succession. I understand, Lyraliai continued, raising her voice above the noise, that you've been protecting me from the truth because you thought it would hurt me. But it hurts more not knowing. And it hurts seeing you carry all that sadness alone. Queen Valdara stood frozen on her throne, her carefully constructed world crumbling around her. And I understand, Lyraliai said, turning to look directly at me, that Dr. Zara is not Dr. Webb. She's not the person who hurt you, Mother. She's the person who took care of me when I was lost and scared, and she's the person who's trying to help us figure out how to be safe without being alone. The princess walked over to me and took my hand. Dr. Zara, this man is my father. Will you help me find him? The question hung in the air like a challenge to the entire foundation of Zirian's isolationist policies. I looked at Lyralii, at Queen Valdara, at the assembled court waiting to see how this unprecedented situation would resolve itself. Lyralii, I said carefully, that's not a decision I can make alone. That's a decision your mother has to make. All eyes turned to Queen Valdara, who looked like a woman watching everything she built to protect her daughter be swept away by the daughter herself. Dr. Marcus Webb, she said finally, her voice hollow. Xenoanthropologist. Brilliant, charming, and utterly convinced that he could bridge any gap between species through understanding and goodwill. What happened? I asked gently. He fell in love with our world. With our culture. With. She looked at Lyralii, with me. And when his expedition was recalled, he promised to return. He promised to find a way to establish formal contact between our peoples. He promised that love could overcome the differences between our civilizations. And he didn't return. Oh, he returned, Queen Valdara's voice was bitter. 3 years later, as part of a Terran Federation diplomatic mission that included military escorts, territorial mapping specialists, and resource assessment teams. He brought official contact, just as he'd promised. And with it, he brought the very real possibility that our world would be consumed by the broader galaxy's interests. I began to understand. So you sent them away. I sent them all away, including him. Including the father of my child. Because I realized that love, no matter how genuine, was not enough to protect my people from the consequences of contact. But Mother, Lyralii said, Dr. Zara says that not all contact has to be the same. Maybe there's a way to have safe contact. Queen Valdara looked at her daughter, at me, at the court full of beings waiting for her decision. Dr. Nightingale, if I were to allow limited contact protocols, what assurance could you give me that my daughter would not suffer for her mixed heritage? None, I said honestly. But I can promise you that she'll suffer more from never knowing her father, from never understanding half of who she is, than she ever would from the challenges of being between two worlds. And if Dr. Webb has moved on with his life, if he's married, has other children, then she'll know that too. But she'll know it, instead of spending her life wondering. Queen Valdara was quiet for a long moment. When she finally spoke, her voice was stronger. Court Xenobiologist Velith, initiate long-range communication protocols. Send a message to the Terran Federation Science Directory requesting current status and location of Dr. Marcus Webb. The court erupted again, but this time with excitement rather than chaos. Furthermore, the Queen continued, Dr. Nightingale will serve as our interim ambassador to humanity, establishing protocols for limited contact under terms to be negotiated. Your Majesty, I said, I'm not a diplomat. Neither was Dr. Webb, and look how that turned out, she replied with what might have been the ghost of a smile. But you're right about one thing, Dr. Nightingale. Isolation has costs. Perhaps it's time to discover if the benefits of careful contact might outweigh the risks. 3 months later, I stood in the same palace courtyard where I'd first met Queen Valdara, watching a Terran Federation diplomatic vessel descend through Zirian's atmosphere. Princess Lyralii stood beside me, practically vibrating with excitement and nervousness. What if he doesn't like me? She asked for the 100th time. Sweetheart, you're impossible not to like. And besides, he's your father. That means loving you is part of his job. Dr. Zara? Thank you for helping us figure out how to be brave. Queen Valdara approached, looking more nervous than I'd ever seen her. Dr. Nightingale, the sensors indicate that Dr. Webb is aboard that vessel. Are you ready for this? No. But as you pointed out, being ready and doing what needs to be done are not always the same thing. The ship landed with a gentle hum of advanced engines, and the airlock opened to reveal a familiar figure stepping onto Xerian soil for the second time in his life. Dr. Marcus Webb was older, his dark hair now streaked with silver, but his eyes held the same kindness and curiosity that had apparently captured a queen's heart 8 years ago. He saw Queen Valdara first, and the expression on his face was everything I'd hoped it would be. Then he saw Lyralii, and his face went through a series of emotions that would have been comical if they weren't so profound. "Hello, Dr. Webb," Lyralii said formally. "I'm Princess Lyralii. I believe I'm your daughter." What followed was the kind of reunion that makes you believe in the power of love to overcome impossible odds, galactic distances, and the stubborn pride of rulers who are too afraid of being hurt to admit they need each other. As I watched Marcus Webb meet his daughter for the first time, and saw Queen Valdara's carefully maintained walls finally crumble in the face of a love that had survived 8 years of separation, I realized that sometimes the best discoveries happen not in laboratories or research stations, but in the messy, complicated, wonderful connections between people who are brave enough to trust each other despite every reason not to. My vacation had definitely not gone according to plan. But as I stood there in an alien palace, watching a family rebuild itself across the space between worlds, I couldn't think of anywhere else I'd rather be. "Dr. Zara," Lyralii called, "come meet my father." And just like that, I was no longer an outsider looking in, but part of something bigger and more beautiful than any molecular structure I'd ever analyzed, a family that spanned the stars.